Hi everyone, this is presentation number 15 in our series of presentations on project management for all. And this time we're going to talk about the project risk management. So risks are a very important subject in every project because some risks can damage and destroy the project, and some of them, the positive ones, might enhance the successfulness of the project. So to start with an overview of the project risk management, the definition of this process, it includes the processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, response implementation, and monitoring risk on a project. The objectives of the project risk management are to increase the probability and/or impact of positive risks and to decrease the probability and/or impact of negative risks in order to optimize the chances of project success. So as we said and mentioned before many times, there are positive risks and there are negative risks. This process includes the following steps actually. The first one is plan risk management. The second, identify risks. The third, perform qualitative risk analysis. The fourth is perform quantitative risk analysis. The fifth is plan risk responses. And the sixth, implement risk responses. And the last one is the seventh is the monitor of risks. So this is also an overview of the project risk management. So we plan for the project risk management, then we identify the risk, then we perform the qualitative risk analysis, and then perform the quantitative risk, and then analysis, then plan the responses, then implement the responses, and then monitor the responses. Monitor the risks, sorry. The options to deal with risks, so there are many options, and these are for positive and negative risks. So we either escalate the risks to the higher authority, or to avoid the risks, transfer the risk, enhance the risk, share the risk with someone else, exploit the risk, accept it as it is, doing nothing, and or mitigate the risk. And we will talk about these in the coming sections of the presentation. The process key concepts, that the first one is all projects are risky since they are unique undertakings with varying degree of complexity. So in every project there are risks, and depends on the complexity of that project. Second, risks have the potential to cause the project to deviate from the plan and fail to achieve the defined project objectives. So they may fail the project. The third, risk exists at two levels within every project. There are individual project risks and there are the overall project risks. So the individual may cause a problem to one activity or one or two or more of the activities or the objectives of the project. But on the overall project risk is the effect of uncertainty on the project as a whole, which affect the project as a whole. The fourth concept is both individual project risk and overall project risk can have a positive or negative effect on the project. The fifth concept is that risks will continue to emerge during the lifetime of the project So this process should be conducted continuously. The sixth concept, in order to manage risk effectively on a particular project, the project team needs to know what level of risk exposure is acceptable in each organization. So each organization has a risk exposure which is, special to that organization. The seventh concept, the unknowable unknowns. These are risks that can only be recognized after they have occurred, because some risks are known, but these are unknowns. So emerged risks can be tackled through developing project resilience through these four concepts. A right level of budget and schedule a contingency. So we should have contingency for the budget and the schedule. The second is frequent review of yearly warning signs. So we have to watch for these yearly warning signs. The third is the flexible project processes that can cope with the emergent risk. And the last one is a clear input from stakeholders. So now we talk about the first process, which is the plan risk management. The definition is of this process. The plan risk management is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. The key benefit of this process is that it ensures that the degree, type, and visibility of risk management are proportionate to both risk and the importance of the project to the organization and other stakeholders. This process is performed once or at predefined points in the project. So it's not continuous like other processes. The plan risk management process should begin when a project is conceived and should be completed early in the project. So this has to be done in the planning stage of the project. The inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs of this process are depicted in this figure. The inputs for this process are the first one is the project charter. The second one is the project management plan, which include all the components of the project management plan, which we talked about this before actually. The third input is the project documents, which include the risk register. The fourth input is the enterprise environmental factors, and the fourth one is the organizational process assets. And I'm not going to talk about these inputs because we already talked about them in previous presentations. Tools and techniques that are needed here are the expert judgment, the data analysis, which include the stakeholders analysis, and the meetings. And also, I'm not going to talk about these tools because we already covered them before. The output of this process is to develop the risk management plan. And we will talk about this in the next section. So the risk management plan is a component of the project management plan that describes how risk management activities will be structured and performed. And it will include some or all of the following elements. So the risk management plan, it includes the risk category, which describes the general approach to managing risks on the project. The second one is the methodology, defines the specific approaches, tools, and data sources that will be used to perform the risk management of the project. The third part is the roles and responsibilities. So it will define the lead, support, and risk management team members and who does what and when. The funding, who does what? The funding identifies the funds needed to perform activities. The timing defines when and how often the project risk management processes will be performed throughout the project lifecycle. The last one is risk categories, which will provide a means of grouping individual project risks. A common way to structure the risk categories is with a risk breakdown structure. Will be shown, an example shown in the next section. So this is an example of a risk breakdown structure, which is taken from PMBOK. So the first level, level 0, is the all sources of project risk. The second one, the second level or level 1, is the types of risk. So we may have technical risk, we may have management risk, we have commercial risk, we have external risk. And these are the sources of the technical risk. It could be from scope definition, it could be from requirements definition, it could be from the estimates, assumptions and constraints, it could be from the technical processes or technology or technical interfaces or some other factors. The sources of the management risk are the project management, program or portfolio management, operations management, and organization, and resourcing and communication. So these are the sources of the management risk. The commercial risk could be from contractual terms and conditions, or internal procurement, or from suppliers and vendors, or from subcontracts, or from client customer stability, or partnership and joint ventures. These are all sources of risk for the project. External risks, which are outside the organization and outside the project authority, it could be from legislations or exchange rates, fluctuation of exchange rates, site or facilities, or environmental or weather conditions, or competition from other organizations, or regulatory factors, or could be some other factors also. The second process of this risk management, project risk management, is the identify risk. So definition is this process of identifying individual project risk as well as all sources of overall project risk and documenting their characteristics. The key benefit of this process is the documentation of existing individual project risk and the sources of overall project risk. It also brings together information so the project team can respond appropriately to identified risk. And this process is performed throughout the project. It's not like the plan project risk that's done in the planning phase. This one is continuous process. The inputs of this process are the project management plan, all sections of the project management plan, and the schedule and budget baselines. The second input is the project documents, could be assumption logs, cost estimates, duration estimates, issue log, lesson learned register, and stakeholders register. The third input are the agreements and contracts. The fourth one is the procurement documentation. The fifth one is the enterprise environmental factors. So these are the inputs, and I'm not going to talk about them because we already covered them in previous presentations. The tools and techniques that are used here are the expert judgment, data gathering, which could include brainstorming, checklist, and interviews. And third tool is the data analysis, which include root cause analysis, assumptions analysis, and SWOT analysis, documents analysis, and interpersonal team skills, which include facilitation and prompt list. And we will talk about these three tools, which are highlighted in yellow in the next section. And I'm not going to talk about the other tools because we already covered them in previous presentations. The output of this process is the risk register and risk report and project documents updates, which include assumption log, lesson learned register, and issue log. Also, I'm not going to talk about these outputs because they were covered in previous sections or previous presentations. The prompt list, which are one of the tools used in this process, the prompt list is a predetermined list of risk categories that might give rise to individual project risk, and that could also act as a source of overall project risk. The prompt list can be used as a framework to aid the project team in idea generation when using risk identification technique. The risk categories in the lowest level of the risk breakdown structure can be used as a prompt list for individual project risk. The second tool is the root cause analysis. This is very important. Root cause analysis is typically used to discover the underlying causes that lead to a problem and develop preventive action. It can be used to identify threats by starting with a problem statement. For example, the project might be delayed or over budget, and exploring which threats might result in that problem occurring. The strength, weakness, and opportunities and threats analysis. This is also important. This technique examines the project from each of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats perspective. For risk identification, it is used to increase the breadth of identified risks by including internally generated risks. The technique starts with the identification of strengths and weaknesses of the organization, focusing on either of the project, the organization, or the business as a whole. The third process in the risk management, the project risk management, is the perform qualitative risk analysis, PQRA. Definition: perform qualitative risk analysis is the process of prioritization of individual project risks for further analysis or action by assessing their probability of occurrence and impact. So we assess the how probable the occurrence and how much the impact of each risk. The benefit of this process is that it focuses on efforts on high priority risks. So once we know which one is the highest probable and high impact risk, we deal with them first. The inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs are depicted in the next page figure. General remarks. The PQRA assesses the priority of identified individual project risk using their probability of occurrence and the impact. The PQRA establishes the relative priorities of individual project risk for plan risk responses. So it will help us to the plan responses for these risks. The PQRA process is performed regularly throughout the project life cycle. The inputs, tools, and techniques for this process are depicted in this figure. So the inputs are the project management plan, which include the risk management plan, which are developed in the first process, which is the plan risk management. Then the second input is the project documents, which include the assumption log and the risk register and the stakeholders register. The third one is the enterprise environmental factors, and the fourth one is the organizational process assets. Tools and techniques. The first tool is the expert judgment. The second one is the data gathering, data analysis. The fourth one, interpersonal and team skills. And the fifth one is the risk categorization. And the sixth one is the data representation. And the seventh is the meetings. And I'm not also going to talk about these tools and techniques because they were covered in previous presentations. The output of this process is to update the project documents. So we may need to update the assumption logs. We may need to update the issue log. We may need to update the risk log register and the risk report. This important note that this process is subjective and prone to bias, and therefore the bias is addressed by the facilitator because the project team may have bias. So once we have, if we have a risk facilitator, he will deal and address the bias from the project team. The perform qualitative risk analysis lays the foundation for the next process, which is the perform the quantitative risk analysis, is if this process is required, because sometimes it's not required. So the fourth process in the project risk management is to perform the quantitative risk analysis. So in the previous process, we did the qualitative, the probability and the impact of each risk. Now we do the quantitative risk analysis. So the definition, perform quantitative risk analysis is the process of numerically analyzing the combined effect of identified individual risk and other sources of uncertainty on overall project objectives. So this time we give numerical values to each risk. So say one risk has a 10 degree of probability and 7 degrees of impact. Another risk may have 9 degrees of probability of occurrence and could be 10 degrees of impact. The key benefit of this process is that it quantifies the overall project risk exposure, and it can also provide additional quantitative risk information to support risk response planning. This process is not required for every project because these processes are expensive. So for some small and non-complex projects, we don't need to do this process. The inputs and outputs of this process and tools are depicted in the figure in the following page. Some notes on this process and some key concepts. Perform quantitative risk analysis is not required for all projects. Undertakings of robust analysis depends on the availability of high quality data and individual project risk and other sources. This process usually requires specialized risk software and expertise. The Perform quantitative risk analysis uses information on individual project risk that have been assessed by the previous process, which is the Plan Perform qualitative risk analysis. The output from the Perform quantitative risk analysis are used as input to plan the risk responses. So when we identify and quantify the risk, we need to plan how to deal with these risks. Now we deal with the inputs and tools and techniques. So these are depicted in this figure. So the input, there are many inputs to this process. So it could be a project management plan, project documents, assumption log, basis of estimate, cost estimates, duration estimates, milestones estimates, resource requirements, risk register, and risk report, and schedule forecast. And the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process assets. These are the inputs to this process, and I'm not going to talk about them because we already covered all of them in previous presentations. The tools also expert judgment and data gathering interviews, interpersonal team skills, which include facilitation, and the fourth, representation of uncertainty, and the fifth one, data analysis, which includes simulation, sensitivity analysis, and decision tree analysis, and influence diagram. And I will talk about these highlighted in yellow in the coming section of this presentation. The output of this process is the project documents updates. So we need to update the risk register. So these tools and techniques representation of uncertainty. Quantitative risk analysis requires inputs to quantitative risk analysis model that affect individual project risk and other sources of uncertainty, where the duration of cost or resource requirements for a planned activity is uncertain. The range of possible values can be represented in the model as probability distribution. The most common used are triangular, normal, long normal, beta, uniform, or discrete distributions. And you could always Google these and see, read about them. The data analysis, we may use simulation. So quantitative risk analysis uses a model that simulates the combined effects of individual project risk and other sources of uncertainty to evaluate their potential impact on achieving project objectives. The sensitivity analysis helps to determine which individual project risk or other source of uncertainty have the most potential impact on project outcome. So we will, once we do the simulation and we know which one is the most risk can affect the project, we deal with it first. The decision tree analysis, decision trees are used to support selection of the best of several alternative sources of action. Alternative paths through the project are shown on a diagram like a tree and with branches. So from that one, the end of each points of the end of the points of the branch in the decision tree represent the outcome from following that particular path, which can be negative or positive. The influence diagram are graphical aids to decision making under uncertainty. And influence diagram represents the project or situation within a project or as a set of entities, outcomes and influence, together with the relationship and effects between them. So I also advise you to read more about these in the internet. The fifth process. So we planned, identified, did the qualitative and quantitative analysis, and then we need to plan the risk responses. Plan risk responses is the process of developing options, selecting strategies, and agreeing on actions to address overall project risk exposure, as well as to treat individual project risk. The key benefit of this process is that it identifies appropriate ways to address overall project risk and individual project risk. This process is also allocates resources and insert activities into the project documents and project management plan as needed. This process is performed throughout the project. So once we plan the risk responses and we know who is going to do what in the project and when it is done. Note, effective and appropriate risk responses can minimize individual threats and maximize individual opportunities, I mean the positive risk, and reduce overall project risk exposure. Unsuitable project risk responses can have the converse effect. The risk responses should be appropriate for the significance of the risk, cost effective in meeting the challenge. So we should know if the project risk is a huge, we may need to spend more money on it. If it is not huge, so we should not spend so much money and so much time on it. Specific actions are developed to implement the agreed upon risk response strategy, including primary and backup strategies as necessary. So we should have a strategy, and we should have also a backup strategy. These are the tools, inputs and tools and techniques for this process, and the outputs also. So the inputs are the project management plan, the resource management plan, and risk management plan, and the cost baseline. The project documents which are needed here are the project documents. We need the lesson learned or the project schedule. We need the project team assignments. We need the resource calendars. We need the risk register and risk report and the risk stakeholders register. The input also the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process assets. The tools and techniques, data gathering, interviews, interpersonal skills, which includes facilitation, and the strategies of threats, and also strategies for opportunities. And the fifth tool is the contingent response strategies. And the sixth one is strategies for overall project risk and the data analysis, alternative analysis, cost benefit analysis, and decision making. Decision making may include multi-criteria decision analysis. And I will talk about these highlighted in yellow in the next section. The outputs of this process is the change request and project management plan updates and project documents updates. So once we do all this processes, we may need to do some changes, change request, and go through the change management process to approve them and implement them if they are approved. So the tools and techniques, the strategies of threats and strategies of opportunities. Strategies of threats, we may need to escalate the risk to higher management if we cannot deal with it, or if it is outside our authority, I mean the team and the project manager, or we may deal with it and avoid the risk as a whole. Transfer the risk. One of the tools used to transfer the risk is to have insurance for the project. Mitigate. We may not need to avoid the risk as a whole because it's too expensive. So we just need to mitigate the effect of the risk, or just accept the risk and do nothing about it if it is not very important. The strategies for opportunities, which are the positive risk, also we may escalate the risk or the opportunity to the higher authority if it is outside our authority, or if we can't deal with it and exploit the opportunity when it comes, and we may share it with another department or with another team in the organization, or share it with another organization if it is, say, too expensive, or we may need the expertise of another organizations, or enhance the probability of the opportunity in order to become more obvious and more ready to be exploited, or if the opportunity is not very important, it is positive but not very important, and we don't have the resources to deal with it, so we just accept it as it is and just don't do anything about it. The second tool, the cost benefit analysis. If the impact of the individual project risk can be quantified in monetary terms, say it will cost so much, then the cost effectiveness of the alternative risk response strategies can be determined using the cost benefit analysis. The ratio of the change in impact level divided by the implementation cost. So the ratio between these two factors, change in the impact, how much is the change, divided by the cost, and to see the, it will give us the cost effectiveness of the response. So if the ratio is high, it means it is cost effective. If the ratio is very low, it's not very cost effective. The multi-criteria decision making. This uses a decision matrix to provide a systematic approach for establishing key decision criteria, evaluating and ranking alternatives. The sixth process here is in the project risk management is to implement the risk responses. So we planned and identified these risk responses. Now we need to implement these responses. The definition of this process, it is the process of implementing agreed upon risk responses plans. So we made the risk response plans. Now we need to implement these plans or these responses. The key benefit of this process is that it ensures that agreed upon risk responses are executed as planned in order to address overall project risk exposure and minimize individual project threats and maximize individual project opportunities. Proper attention is required to ensure that agreed upon risk responses are actually executed. Sometimes project teams spend a lot of time in planning, identifying, and analyzing risk, but when it comes to execution of the risk responses, maybe they will not execute the risk responses. There's no action is taken to manage the risk, which is not good. So we need to monitor this process. The inputs and techniques. Could be a project management plan, project documents, lesson learned, risk register, or organizational process assets. Tools and techniques could be expert judgment, interpersonal and team skills, and project management information system. The output of this process, we could have change requests. We may need to update the project documents. The last process of the project risk management is to monitor the risk. So monitoring of the risk is the process of monitoring the implementation of agreed upon risk response plans, tracking identified risk, identifying and analyzing new risk, and evaluating risk process effectiveness throughout the project. The benefit is that it enables the project decisions to be based on current information about overall project risk exposure and individual project risk. And this process is performed throughout the project. And the tools, inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs will be are depicted in the figure in the next page. General remarks about this process. So the monitor risk process uses information generated during project execution to determine if implemented risk responses are effective, level of overall project risk has changed, status of identified project risk has changed, to see if new individual project risks have arisen, and to see if the risk management approach is still appropriate, to see if the project assumptions are still valid, and to see risk management policies and procedures are being followed, and to see if the contingency reserves for cost or schedule requires modification or still valid, or to see if the project strategy is still valid. So the last section is this figure depicts the tools, inputs, tools, and techniques for this process, and I'm not going to talk about them in detail. You could always, because most of them we talked about before, and this is the end of this presentation, and I hope it is useful, and also hope to see you in the next future for a new presentation. Thank you very much, and see you again.